Thank you so much. Welcome from me too to the best Tudor palace in the world. And yes, I am biased, but I am also correct. If you love the Tudors, there is nowhere better to be. I was your age when I fell in love with the Tudors big time. I already liked history in general, but thanks to Mrs. Jones, I became captivated by that dynasty that ruled England for 118 years, 1485 to 1603. So I want to tell you in general terms about the Tudors really behind closed doors. And much of the material I'm going to be talking about takes place right here at Hampton Court Palace. And the talk today really is based on three of my books in particular. And they are Elizabeth's Women, the kind of women who shaped my favourite queen and my favourite Tudor, the private lives of the Tudors, which I like to say is kind of horrible histories for grown-ups because it's all the nitty-gritty of what the Tudors were actually like when they were off duty, if you like, how they lived, what went into creating their magnificent public image. And then my latest book about Anne Boleyn and her daughter, Elizabeth I. Well, I've worked for historic royal palaces for 16 years now, and my favourite part of working here is that I get to go through the doors that say private on them. Now, probably 9 out of 10 of those doors lead to something like a broom cupboard. You know, it's not particularly exciting. A lot of the backroom stuff we tend to use for meetings or for storage. So we definitely open most of the best bits of the palace to the public, and you'll be exploring some of that today. But it definitely gives me a bit of a thrill to go to a part of the palace that not many people get to see. And it was exactly the same in Tudor times, because every Tudor palace was built in a very deliberate way to create a sort of separation between the Tudor monarch and the Tudor court. So not everyone could just wander wherever they liked. If you were a visitor 500 years ago to Hampton Court, then it was all done according to rank and status. At the heart of the palace was what was known as the Privy Chamber, the private apartments of the king and queen. Now, pretty much only the king and queen, their immediate servants, and their greatest favourites would get to go in those rooms. And then it was like a ripple effect. Leading outwards, the rooms got less and less important. I would probably have been about here in the very, very outer reaches of the court if I had been a visitor back then. And we know about the activities of the staff who served the Tudors in private because they left a very, very detailed record of their daily activities. The Tudors were great record keepers, and their servants would write everything down, the minutiae of what it was like to serve the Tudors. Now, these records still exist. Many of them are in the National Archives today, but they haven't been looked at in great detail. I looked at them in a lot of detail for my book on the private lives, and they really are quite illuminating. They give you a new insight into the Tudors when you look at how they're spending their time and their money behind closed doors. But a bit of general history about Hampton Court. It was first built, or the building work started back in 1514. And even though Hampton Court is synonymous with Henry VIII, it wasn't his palace originally. It was started by his chief advisor, the all-powerful Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, I'm sure, who is very familiar to you. And he was of humble origins. He was the son of a butcher from Suffolk, and he rose to become the man that people called the Alter Rex, the other king, because he amassed so much power in the court of Henry VIII, and he loved to surround himself with magnificence, hence building this rather nice palace that in fact became so nice, so magnificent, that Henry VIII was rather jealous of Wolsey's new palace of Hampton Court and eventually took it over. What's not clear is whether Wolsey gifted Hampton Court to Henry, that's what the Henrician PR will tell you, or whether in fact Henry pretty much stole it from Wolsey. As soon as he had taken over Hampton Court, he extended it. What do you do if you're given a magnificent palace? Well, if you're Henry VIII, you build even more. And he added the Great Hall, which you see there. He builds the Great Hall in honour of his second wife, Anne Boleyn, and you can still see some of her emblems. If you're very eagle-eyed, perhaps I should set that as a telescope for you to spot some of the intertwined H and A's for Henry and Anne Boleyn that he added to the Great Hall. But only a couple exist today because, of course, Anne Boleyn doesn't stay in favour with Henry for all that long. She's queen for less than 3 years. So all of her emblems, her initials, are ripped down, but some have been saved. Now, Saira mentioned the Tudor World exhibition. If you have chance, do pop along and see it because there are some real Tudor treasures in that, including a carved oak falcon. You see it there on the left. It's gilded. Now, Henry ordered 150 of these for Hampton Court because the falcon was Anne Boleyn's most famous emblem, so he decorated the palace in her honour. Then she fell from grace, failed to give him a son. Of course, it was all her fault. She was executed on trumped-up charges of adultery. And, as I mentioned, her emblems were taken down. But this one was saved. And it turned up at an auction a few years ago. And it was bought for £75 by a man who knew a bit about Tudor antiques. And he had it restored. And he told us about it here at the palaces. And we were able to positively identify it as one of those 150 falcons that Henry had commissioned for Anne Boleyn, but the rest were almost all destroyed. We now have it here on long-term loan. And by the way, it's now valued at about £250,000. So that was £75 well spent. Let's talk now about the private lives of the Tudors at Hampton Court. And I mentioned that the Tudor palaces are built around privacy. The Tudors really understood PR, we would call it, that they needed to enhance their reputation, their image, because actually the Tudors didn't have a great claim to the throne of England. Henry VII won the crown on the battlefield at Bosworth, but there were other stronger blood claimants to the throne. The Tudors were actually descended from an illegitimate line. So they needed to convey their magnificence, their right to the throne. And they bought into this idea that had been around for centuries, the Tudors didn't invent it, that the monarch was somehow different to mere mortals. There was something special, something almost divine about kings and queens. And so they really invested heavily in creating magnificent private apartments. And there was a sense that if you were lucky enough to step inside those private apartments, then you were almost touched by God. You know, that this was something so special. And actually, they borrowed this idea of really lavish private apartments from one of their predecessors. Here you see King Edward IV, a very popular Yorkist king, the brother of King Richard III. And Edward IV was the one who really appreciated how useful it could be to separate off the private apartments from the rest of the court in order to make the courtiers know that the king and queen really are something special. It's rare to get a glimpse of what these private apartments looked like at the time. Even here at Hampton Court, most of those private apartments have been lost. The monarchs, William and Mary, in the late 17th century came along, loved Hampton Court, thought it was old-fashioned, so started demolishing it. Luckily, they ran out of money halfway through, so we still have half of the Tudor palace. But the half with some of the private apartments has been lost. We do, though, have rather useful illustrations from the time, including this one, which is a sketch after the famous artist Hans Holbein. And the title of this sketch always makes me smile because it's called Henry VIII Dining in Private. There's about 23 courtiers watching him dine in private, but actually this was relative privacy. Henry and his fellow Tudor monarchs preferred to eat in their private apartments. So that image that we tend to have of them at the top table in a great feast, it's really more due to Hollywood fiction than to reality. The Tudors loved to dine in private. And this still was pretty private compared to their life in the public court. But the Tudors, I should say, never were truly alone. So we think of privacy now as being, on our own or perhaps just with one or two people. The Tudors would never have been on their own, the Tudor monarchs. They were born surrounded by people. Childbirth was not private. What happened before childbirth was not private. So they lived their lives on a public stage, but they certainly had more privacy in their private apartments.